Chapter 1. He sold his life to the god of death, just to save the woman who raised him. But death didn't want his life. It wanted something 1,000 times crueler. The ice cracked beneath his boots. Zalthar didn't fight the dark water pulling him under. He let the freezing current drag him down into the absolute black. Above him, the faint silver light of the Ethelgard moon vanished, swallowed by the depths. He didn't hold his breath. If he breathed, he might fight, and he was too tired to fight. But her voice still echoed in his mind, sharp and venomous. "You are nothing without the crown, Zalthar. Just a beast pretending to be a king." Blythe, his mate. She had stood before the entire council just hours ago, her eyes cold, her hand resting intimately on the shoulder of another alpha. She didn't just take his throne. She took the Lumina stone, the only artifact capable of saving his dying mother, Odelia. "Throw him out," Blythe had ordered the guards, not even looking at him. "He disgusts me." Then she leaned in, dropping her voice so only he could hear the final, crushing blow. "I never loved you. I only needed your power." His lungs burned, his muscles locked. The Ethel panther inside him thrashed against the dying light, clawing violently at his ribs. "Fight!" the beast roared. "Tear their throats out." Zalthar refused. He needed the bottom. He needed the abyss. Suddenly, the freezing cold shifted into a suffocating, unnatural pressure. He wasn't drowning anymore. The river was gone. He was falling. He slammed onto solid obsidian. The impact echoed like a gunshot in the void. "Look at the fallen king." The voice didn't come from the shadows. It was the shadows. Zalthar pushed himself up to his knees. His jaw tightened. He refused to show weakness. "Morthos," Zalthar growled. The god of death materialized from the darkness. He wore no face, only a shroud of decaying light. The gravity in the room warped, pressing Zalthar firmly to the stone floor. Even the echoes in the void died when he spoke. "You reek of betrayal, little panther," Morthos mocked. He circled Zalthar slowly. "Your mate discarded you. Your pack spat on your name. And now you crawl into my domain. Why?" "Odelia." Zalthar forced the name through gritted teeth. "Fix what Blythe broke. Save my mother." Morthos laughed. The sound rattled Zalthar's bones. "A mortal life for a favor? I owned your soul eons ago, Zalthar. Long before you played at being a king, you have nothing to trade. I have my servitude." Zalthar snapped his head up, locking his glowing eyes with the void. "I will be your hound. Just save her." Morthos leaned in close. The scent of burning ash grew unbearable. "4 tasks," the entity whispered. 4 marks of sin. Complete them, and the woman who raised you breathes. Fail even one, and I will drag her soul into the weeping abyss myself. "Agreed." Zalthar didn't hesitate. "I don't just want your service, beast," Morthos sneered. "I want your suffering." Morthos struck. A blast of dark, unseen energy slammed into Zalthar's chest. His body convulsed violently as something ancient broke loose. The fragile human wall holding back his feral instincts shattered. The panther roared. Purple fire ignited in his veins, burning away his humanity. But the power felt unstable, like it might tear him apart. "Welcome back to my leash," Morthos commanded. "Now wake up." Zalthar gasped. He breached the surface of the river, thrashing violently. The freezing water felt like nothing. A raging inferno burned beneath his skin. He dragged himself onto the jagged rocks. His claws, now extended, lethal and dark as obsidian, dug deep into the stone. His shadow stretched, morphing into the massive, terrifying silhouette of the Ethel panther. His eyes glowed a lethal, blinding purple. A searing pain erupted on his left wrist. Zalthar hissed, ripping his soaked sleeve back. Black blood seeped from his pores, forming a single, jagged line of text. Task 1. Steal the Siren's Tear. He stared at the mark, the most guarded artifact in the underground black market. Breaking in was suicide. Perfect, Zalthar muttered. He pushed himself to his feet. He took one step toward the dense forest. Then the air shifted. Zalthar spun around, his panther reflexes taking over. His hand shot out, aiming to crush a throat. His fingers caught nothing but air. Before he could pivot again, cold, hard steel pressed directly against his throat. He hadn't heard the approach. He hadn't smelled a threat. "I wouldn't do that." The voice was soft, melodic, but carried no fear. "Who are you?" Zalthar demanded, a lethal rumble in his chest. He didn't step back. "The person who is going to keep you alive," she replied. She stepped out of his blind spot. Zalthar froze. A scent hit him. Vanilla, midnight rain, and ancient magic. It slammed into his senses, overriding his rage. The feral panther inside him went completely, terrifyingly still. "Mate," the word echoed in his mind, unbidden and absolute. For the first time since the river, he forgot how to breathe. She looked up at him. She didn't flinch at his glowing purple gaze. She didn't cower before his massive frame. "I know about the mark," Iceland said, her voice steady. "I know about the tear." Zalthar narrowed his eyes. "Try giving me an order," he warned, leaning deliberately into the sharp edge of the knife. A single drop of blood trailed down his neck. "See what happens." Aislinn didn't drop her gaze. "Put your fangs away, beast. I am not your enemy." "You hold a blade to my throat." "I hold your attention," she corrected. "We don't have time for your ego. The black market moves the tear at midnight. We have exactly 3 hours. Now, are you going to kill me, or are we going to save your mother?" Chapter 2. 3 hours, Zalthar repeated. His voice was a dangerous low rumble in the quiet forest. "You expect me to trust a stranger with a blade, smelling of magic I don't recognize, to break into the most heavily fortified vault in Ethelgard?" "I expect you to follow me," Iceland said. She finally lowered the knife, though her eyes never left his. "Unless you prefer to fail Morthos on your first night." Zalthar's jaw tightened. He hated that she knew the name. He hated that the feral beast inside him, the Ethel panther that had wanted to slaughter the world 10 minutes ago, was now purring at the sound of her voice. "Mate." He shoved the instinct down. "Lead the way." The descent into the black market was a maze of rotting tunnels and neon-lit decay. The air smelled of cheap liquor, stolen magic, and fear. Zalthar walked a half-step behind Iceland. He didn't want to protect her. He wanted to watch her. Every time she moved, that intoxicating scent, vanilla and midnight rain, spiked. It was maddening. "You're staring," Aislinn said, not looking back. "I'm assessing a liability," Zalthar shot back. "I got the blade to your throat, Alpha. I'm not the liability." A low growl vibrated in Zalthar's chest. He stepped closer, closing the distance until the heat of his chest almost brushed her back. "Do not test my patience, little weaver." Iceland stopped abruptly. She turned, forcing him to halt so suddenly their bodies almost collided. She tilted her chin up, completely unfazed by the glowing purple fire in his eyes. "Then don't underestimate me," she whispered. Before Zalthar could reply, a harsh voice barked from the shadows. "Passes. Now." They had reached the inner gate. 2 massive mercenaries blocked the iron doors. They reeked of dark magic and old sweat. Iceland stepped forward, her demeanor instantly shifting from defiant to smooth. She pulled 2 forged tokens from her cloak and handed them over. "Just passing through, gentlemen," the larger guard sneered. He took the tokens, but his filthy eyes dragged up and down Aislin's body. "I haven't seen a pretty little thing like you down here before." "We're in a hurry," Aislinn said coldly. The guard stepped closer. He reached out. His thick, calloused fingers brushed against the curve of Aislinn's waist. Snap! Something inside Zalthar broke. The unstable, terrifying power of the abyss that had been clawing at his insides tore loose. "Remove your hand," Zalthar commanded. The words didn't sound human. They echoed with the weight of a collapsing star. The guard laughed, tightening his grip on Aislinn. "Or what, pretty boy?" Zalthar didn't move. He didn't throw a punch. He simply let his eyes burn a blinding, lethal purple. The gravity in the tunnel shattered. An invisible, crushing weight slammed down directly onto the guard. The stone floor beneath the man's boots cracked instantly. "What?" the guard gasped, his knees buckling. "I said." Zalthar took 1 step forward. The pressure multiplied. "Remove it." The guard hit the floor violently. The impact echoed off the tunnel walls. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't scream. The invisible force was flattening him against the stone, holding him entirely paralyzed. His partner drew a weapon, but Zalthar merely glanced at him, and the second man was thrown against the iron doors, pinned by the same terrifying force. Aislinn stared at Zalthar. She saw the absolute possessive madness in his eyes. He wasn't just defending a companion. He was protecting what was his. "Zalthar, stop." Aislinn grabbed his arm. The touch of her skin sent a shockwave through him. He blinked. The purple fire flickered, fighting the urge to crush the men completely. "We need them alive to open the gate," she urged, her voice low, urgent. "Pull it back, now." Before Zalthar could reel in the volatile magic, alarms blared. The iron doors began to slide open, revealing a dozen more armed guards rushing toward the commotion. "Great," Aislinn muttered. "So much for stealth." "I have it," Zalthar growled, raising his hands to unleash the void. "No, you don't." A sudden sharp bark echoed behind them. Out of the shadows trotted a mangy, hairless dog. It looked like it was half-starved and missing an ear. The guards paused, confused by the pathetic creature. The dog let out a ragged sigh, opened its jaws, and unleashed a massive, blinding torrent of hellfire straight into the tunnel ceiling. The explosion rocked the corridor. Smoke and fire blinded the guards. "Muzzle!" Zalthar yelled. "Move!" Aislinn grabbed his hand and dragged him through the chaos, the hellhound darting past their legs. They sprinted through a maze of narrow alleys, the shouts of the guards fading behind them. Aislinn pulled them into a dark, dead-end alcove and slammed Zalthar against the brick wall to keep him out of sight. They stood chest to chest in the dark. Silence stretched between them, broken only by their ragged breathing. The heat of their bodies was trapped in the tiny space. Zalthar looked down. His hands were gripping her hips, holding her impossibly close. He didn't remember moving them there. He didn't want to let go. "You lost control," Aislinn breathed, looking up at him. Her chest rose and fell against his. "He touched you," Zalthar replied. It wasn't an excuse. It was a fact. "You don't even know me." "I know what you are," he murmured. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. The Ethel Panther demanded he claim her right now. "Why are you here? Who sent you?" Aislinn didn't shrink away. Instead, she slid her hands up his chest, her fingers brushing the damp fabric of his shirt. The touch was electric. "No one sent me, Xalthar," she said softly. The defiance in her eyes vanished, replaced by an ancient, heavy sorrow. "I've been looking for you. For a very, very long time, Zalthar froze. Before he could process her words, a searing pain erupted on his chest, right over his heart. He staggered back, ripping his shirt open. The black blood from the first mark had shifted. The letters rearranged themselves, burning violently into his skin. Aislinn gasped as the red glow illuminated the alley. Task 2. Rip out the heart of the betrayer. Bring me the soul of Blythe. Zalthar stared at the glowing words. A dark, terrifying smile slowly spread across his face. Well, Zalthar whispered, looks like we're going home. Chapter 3. The heavy oak doors of the Alpha's estate didn't just open, they shattered. Wood splintered like glass across the marble floor of the grand dining hall. The council members froze, their silver goblets halting in midair. Blythe stood at the head of the long table. The crown of Ethelgard sat perfectly on her head. The new Alpha, Thane, sat beside her, his hand resting possessively on her thigh. Through the settling dust, a massive shadow stepped into the light. "You're supposed to be dead," Thane snarled, half rising from his chair. "You think you can take her back? She chose me." Gravity answered for Zalthar. Thane slammed back into his seat, the heavy mahogany chair cracking beneath an invisible, crushing weight. The entire council gasped as the sudden pressure forced them out of their chairs and onto their knees. Only Blythe remained standing. Zalthar walked slowly down the center of the hall. His purple eyes burned with the fury of the abyss. Beside him, Aislinn matched his pace, her expression unreadable. Behind them, Muzzle let out a low, vibrating growl. The sound carried a demonic frequency that made the remaining guards flinch and back away in sheer panic. Right before the hellhound casually burped a spark of hellfire that ignited the edge of the royal carpet. "Zalthar," Blythe breathed. Her mask of arrogance slipped, replaced by pure, unfiltered shock. "You kept the luminous stone, Blythe," Zalthar's voice carried to every corner of the dead silent hall. It wasn't a request. It was an executioner's bell. "You think you can just walk in here?" Blythe's voice rose, shrill and desperate. She snatched the glowing stone from the pedestal behind her, holding it tightly to her chest. "You have no pack. You have no power here. I don't need a pack to break you," Blythe sneered. She saw the dark, unnatural veins pulsing on his neck. She saw the feral twitch of his jaw. She knew exactly how to hurt him, and she went straight for the emotional kill. "Look at yourself," she spat, her voice echoing in the hall. A feral beast crawling back from the mud. "I didn't betray you, Zalthar. I survived you. I loved you, until I saw the monster you truly are." The words hit. They were designed to tear into the deepest insecurities of his soul. The Ethel Panther inside him roared in agony, remembering every drop of blood he had shed to put that crown on her head. The purple fire in his eyes flickered. He hesitated. Then a soft, warm hand slipped into his. Zalthar stopped breathing. Aislinn stepped forward. She didn't look at the kneeling council. She only looked at Blythe. "He is not a monster," Aislinn said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it rang with an ancient, quiet authority that made the room feel incredibly small. "He is a king, and you are just a thief wearing a stolen crown." Aislinn looked up at Zalthar. Her thumb brushed his knuckles. The volatile, dark storm inside him settled instantly. Zalthar turned his gaze back to Blythe. The hesitation was completely gone. The alpha aura exploded from him. It wasn't the dark magic of the abyss. It was pure, untainted, dominant power. "She is my mate," Zalthar declared, and for the first time, it didn't feel like instinct. It felt like truth. Blythe physically recoiled, The remaining standing guards dropped their weapons. They couldn't fight an alpha claiming his mate. It was a law older than the pack itself. "No," Blythe whispered, her hands shaking. "You're nothing." A loud crack split the air. It wasn't the stone. It was reality itself. The colors drained from the grand hall. The burning torches froze mid-flicker. A drop of spilled wine hung suspended in mid-air. The council members, Thane and Blythe, stopped breathing entirely, trapped like statues in shattered time. Only Zalthar and Aislinn could move. The heavy, sickening scent of burning ash flooded the room. Morthos stepped out of thin air. He didn't look at Blythe. He didn't even glance at the luminous stone. He simply existed, and the world bowed to his presence. "A touching reunion," the god of death whispered. Even the silence seemed to die around him. "You said 4 tasks," Zalthar growled, instantly pulling Aislinn behind his massive frame. "I did," Morthos agreed smoothly, floating inches above the marble floor. "But you brought a guest, a soul that doesn't belong to my ledger." Morthos turned his featureless, decaying face toward Aislinn. The gravity around them inverted sickeningly. "I offer you a choice, little king," Morthos said. His voice echoed from everywhere at once, cold and absolute. "If you choose to save her life today, she will survive, but she will permanently lose every memory of you. You will be forever forgotten by the only soul who truly loves you." Zalthar didn't answer, because for the first time since the river, he didn't know which choice would kill him faster. Chapter 4. The silence in the frozen hall was suffocating. Zalthar stared at the god of death. The alpha aura that had terrified the council seconds ago meant nothing against the endless void of Morthos. Save her life, and she forgets you forever. Zalthar looked down at Aislinn. Her hand was still wrapped tightly around his. The warmth of her skin was the only thing anchoring him to reality. "I won't let you take her mind," Zalthar growled. His chest heaved. "Take my memories instead. Take my life." "I already own your life, little king," Morthos mocked. His voice drifted like ash in the wind. "Choose." Aislinn stepped in front of Zalthar. "You don't get to make that choice for me," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "Aislinn, step back," Zalthar ordered. He reached for her waist. "You don't understand what he is." "I know exactly what he is." Aislinn didn't look away from the void. "And he knows who I am, don't you?" Morthos tilted his faceless head. A hollow, terrifying sound rumbled from the entity. It took Zalthar a second to realize the god of death was laughing. "The runaway soul," Morthos whispered. "You have played this game for a long time, little weaver." Zalthar froze. His grip tightened on her hip. What is he talking about? Aislinn finally turned to him. The fierce, untouchable mask she wore completely shattered. Tears spilled over her cheeks. "You think we met by chance at the river?" Her voice broke. She grabbed the ruined collar of his shirt. "You think my magic just happened to recognize you?" Zalthar stared at her. "Before you were an alpha," Aislinn cried, her fingers digging into his chest. "Before you were the Ethel Panther, you guarded the gates of the underworld. You found a condemned soul crying in the dark, and instead of throwing me into the abyss, you let me go. You took the punishment so I could enter the cycle of rebirth." The memories hit Zalthar like a physical blow, flashes of a cold, endless purgatory, a small glowing light he had hidden in his hands, the agonizing centuries of torture he endured for breaking the laws of the dead. It was her. It had always been her. "I waited through thousands of lifetimes to find you," Aislinn choked out. She pressed her forehead against his chest. I walked through hell just to stand by your side, and now, in this life, you are going to let me forget you?" Zalthar stopped breathing. The absolute tragedy of it tore through him. He grabbed her face, forcing her to look up at him. His purple eyes were wild, desperate. If I let you keep your memories, he kills you, Aislinn," Zalthar yelled. His voice cracked with pure agony. "I won't let you die, not again." He pulled her impossibly close. "I would rather be a ghost in your mind than a king in a world without you." Aislinn sobbed. "If I forget you, I am already dead." She didn't wait for him to argue. She pulled him down and kissed him. It wasn't gentle, it was desperate, bruising. It tasted like tears and impending death. Zalthar kissed her back with feral intensity. His hands tangled in her hair, pouring every ounce of his shattered soul into that single moment in the dark. "How poetic," Morthos sneered. The voice sliced through the heavy air. "And how entirely useless." Morthos raised a hand. The luminous stone in Blythe's frozen hands turned pitch black. A new line of burning text ripped across Zalthar's chest. Task 3. Survive the weeping abyss. The marble floor beneath them simply ceased to exist. Gravity violently inverted. The frozen room shattered like glass. The devastating sound of the world tearing open deafened them. "Zalthar!" Aislinn screamed. The sudden gravitational force ripped her from his arms. "No!" Zalthar lunged. His claws extended, slicing through empty air. He caught the very edge of her sleeve. The fabric tore. Aislinn plummeted backwards into the pitch-black, swirling vortex of the abyss. Without a second thought, Zalthar threw himself into the dark after her. Chapter 5. The wind screamed. Zalthar tore through the endless black, fighting the crushing gravity of the abyss. Shadows whipped past him like razors. Far below, a faint flickering light drifted deeper into the dark. Aislinn. He didn't just dive. He used the void's gravity to launch himself like a missile. He crashed into her, wrapping his massive arms around her waist. But she didn't react. Her body was completely limp. Her eyes were wide open, glazed over with a sickly gray mist. "Aislinn!" Zalthar roared over the howling wind. She was caught in the dream layer. The abyss was feeding on her worst fears, trapping her mind before it consumed her soul. Zalthar didn't hesitate. He pressed his forehead against hers and forced his consciousness into her mind. The roaring wind vanished. Zalthar stood in a gray, ash-covered wasteland. A few yards away, Aislinn was on her knees, shivering. Standing over her was a flawless, terrifying replica of Zalthar himself, wearing the crown of Ethelgard. "You are nothing but a burden," the fake Zalthar sneered. His voice was dripping with venom. "A pathetic mortal who thought a king could love her. I used you to get my power back. Now you can rot." Aislinn choked on a sob, her head bowing in defeat. Pure, unadulterated rage exploded in Zalthar's chest. "Step away from my mate," Zalthar commanded. The fake alpha spun around, but Zalthar was already there. He didn't waste time on words. Zalthar grabbed the illusion by the throat, unleashed a pulse of blinding purple gravity, and crushed it into 1,000,000 particles of black ash. Aislinn flinched, looking up with empty, terrified eyes. "Zalthar? I'm here." He dropped to his knees, grabbing her shoulders. "It's a lie, Aislinn. You have to wake up." "It hurts," she whispered. Dark, creeping veins of shadow began to crawl up her neck. The abyss was claiming her. Her memories were actively being erased. I can't remember why we fell." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced Zalthar's heart. "If I don't anchor her to my soul right now, she's gone forever." but anchoring meant the soul mark. If he bit her while infused with the magic of the god of death, he would infect her light. She would never be purely human again. She would permanently belong to the dark. The Ethel Panther didn't care about the dark. It only cared about keeping what was its own. Zalthar pulled her up against his chest. The space around them began to warp and collapse as the dream fought back. Suddenly, a massive roaring wall of hellfire erupted around them. Muzzle materialized in the dreamscape, his mangy form shifting into a giant, terrifying hellhound. The beast snarled, snapping its flaming jaws at the creeping shadows, creating a protective ring of fire. "Aislinn, look at me," Zalthar demanded, his voice a gravelly rumble. His eyes burned a lethal purple. "If I do this, you will never be entirely human again. You will belong to the abyss. You will belong to me." Aislinn looked into his glowing eyes. The creeping shadows were almost at her jawline. She didn't hesitate. She reached up, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. "I already belong to you," she breathed. "Mark me." Zalthar lost the battle with his control. He gripped her waist, his fingers digging into her skin, and buried his face in the crook of her neck. His fangs extended. He bit down hard. Aislinn gasped, her back arching. It wasn't just blood. It was a violent collision of light and absolute darkness. The venom of the Ethel Panther mixed with the ancient magic of the abyss, burning a permanent dark crescent moon into her skin. The sheer power of the bond shattered the gray wasteland like glass. Reality snapped back. They hit the solid floor of the weeping abyss with a bone-shattering thud. Zalthar took the brunt of the impact, shielding Aislinn with his body. Aislinn coughed, gripping his shirt. The sickly gray mist was gone from her eyes. The mark on her neck pulsed with a faint, dark purple glow. She remembered everything. Zalthar exhaled a shaky breath, pressing his lips to her forehead. "You're safe." But before they could stand, a searing, agonizing heat tore across Zalthar's chest. It was worse than the previous marks. It felt like his heart was being crushed in a vice. Zalthar groaned, falling back against the stone. He ripped his shirt open. The black blood was boiling, forming the final damning sentence. Task 4. Terminate the contract. Surrender the life of Zalthar immediately. Chapter 6. Task 4. Terminate the contract. Surrender the life of Zalthar immediately. The words burned a violent red against Zalthar's chest. Before the glow could fade, the temperature in the abyss plummeted. The shadows twisted, forming a towering, faceless silhouette. Morthos didn't float this time. He stepped onto the stone, carrying a massive scythe forged entirely from screaming souls and gray ash. "The final toll," Morthos whispered. His voice echoed like a collapsing tomb. "Your mother breathes in the world above. Now I collect my payment." "No," Aislinn scrambled forward, throwing herself in front of Zalthar. The dark moon mark on her neck pulsed furiously. "You can't have him. We completed the tasks." "He is the final task, little weaver." Morthos raised the scythe. "A life for a life. Step aside or die with him." Zalthar grabbed Aislinn's waist, pulling her behind him. He didn't tremble. The Ethel Panther inside him was eerily silent, accepting its fate. "I made the deal," Zalthar said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He looked at Aislinn, his purple eyes softening just for her. "Odelia lives. You remember me. I won." Aislinn shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. "Zalthar, please, don't do this. Look away, Aislinn." "I am waiting, little king," Morthos sneered. The god of death swung the scythe. It tore through the fabric of the abyss, aiming straight for Zalthar's neck. Zalthar closed his eyes. A deafening roar shook the cavern. It wasn't a panther. It was a dog. Muzzle leaped from the shadows. The hellhound didn't breathe fire. He didn't try to bite. He simply threw his mangy, battered body directly into the path of the scythe. Crack. The impact was entirely silent, but it shattered the air. Muzzle hit the ground. No blood spilled. Instead, his body began to rapidly dissolve into glowing red embers. Muzzle! Zalthar dropped to his knees, his hands hovering over the dying beast. Muzzle didn't whine. He looked up at Zalthar, his one good eye glowing faintly. Then, a voice, rough, tired, but incredibly fond, echoed directly in the Zalthar's mind. "You took the punishment for me at the gates eons ago, boss. I told you I'd pay you back." Muzzle let out one last ragged sigh. "We're even now." The hellhound shattered into a million sparks of fire, floating up into the dark before vanishing entirely. Zalthar stared at the empty space. His chest caved in. A raw, agonizing roar ripped from his throat, shaking the very foundations of the abyss. "A loophole!" Morthos bellowed, his voice distorting with ancient fury. The scythe in his hands began to crack. "A soul bound to you paid the debt. The contract is sealed, but I will not leave empty-handed." The god of death turned his faceless head toward Iceland. "She keeps her life," Morthos hissed, "but I curse her mind. Let the memories burn." Morthos thrust a hand forward. A blinding beam of gray, decaying light shot straight at Aislin's head. It was the memory curse. Aislinn couldn't move. It was too fast. But an alpha protecting his mate was faster. Zalthar violently threw himself across the stone. He didn't just push her out of the way. He shielded her entirely with his massive frame, taking the absolute brunt of the curse. The gray light slammed into Zalthar's chest. He didn't scream. His back arched, his muscles locking as the curse tore through his veins. The divine immortality that had sustained him for thousands of years shattered like cheap glass. "Fool!" Morthos's voice began to fade as the abyss forcibly rejected him. The contract was complete. "You traded your eternity. You will age. You will weaken. You will die a mortal death." "I don't care." Zalthar forced the words through gritted teeth, his eyes locking onto the fading god. "She remembers." Morthos dissolved into nothing but ash. The abyss collapsed. 1 month later. Ethelgard. The grand hall was silent, not out of fear but out of absolute reverence. The council knelt on the marble floor. None of them dared look up. Blythe was gone, stripped of her title and banished to the frozen wastelands. Thane had fled. The night, the true king, returned. Zalthar sat on the obsidian throne. He didn't wear a crown. He didn't need one. His mere presence commanded the room. He wore a dark, open-collared shirt. Right over his heart, visible to anyone who dared to look, was a jagged ash-gray scar, the mark of the death god, the permanent proof that their alpha was no longer immortal. He would age. He would eventually die. But right now, he was a god to them. Aislinn stood beside his throne. She wore a dress of deep midnight blue, but it was the dark crescent moon pulsing on her neck that kept the entire pack in line. The alpha's mate, the dream weaver who survived the abyss. Zalthar reached out. He didn't ask. He simply pulled Aislinn down onto his lap, directly in front of the kneeling council. Aislinn gasped softly, resting her hands on his broad shoulders. She looked at the scar on his chest, her eyes softening. She traced it gently with her thumb. "You're showing off, Alpha," she whispered, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I'm reminding them," Zalthar murmured. His voice was a low rumble only she could hear. He wrapped a heavy arm securely around her waist, pulling her flush against him. His purple eyes glowed, utterly possessive. He had lost his immortality. He had lost a loyal friend. But as he buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of vanilla and midnight rain, Zalthar knew the truth. He would gladly trade 1,000 eternities just to hold her in this one.